The halls of Solemnace stretch into forever. Each corridor is silent, the kind of silence that does not come from peace but from the weight of time itself. Here, light does not move. It hangs suspended in shimmering stasis, trapped between moments, never fading, never dimming. Every step echoes like a memory. Every doorway opens into another age. This is not a tomb, it is not a palace, it is a museum, a place where time itself is curated, catalogued, and placed behind glass. And at the heart of it all stands Trazyn the Infinite. He does not breathe, he does not age, he does not sleep. The air around him shimmers faintly, heavy with static energy and the scent of ozone. The flickering lights of containment fields reflect across the flawless surface of his necrodermis. A face crafted in the image of nobility, unlined by flesh, untouched by decay. In his clawed hands he holds a small artifact, a simple human trinket no larger than a coin. He turns it over once, twice, studying the faint scratches along its edge. A relic of some forgotten world from a people who burned themselves out 1,000 years ago. It has no real worth, no power, no strategic value, but it is history. And to Trazyn, that is everything. He moves through the hall with mechanical grace, silent, deliberate, his robes whispering across the polished floor. The exhibits watch him as he passes. To the left, a company of ultramarines stand frozen mid-salute, blue armor gleaming beneath stasis fields. To the right, an orc warboss and his entire retinue suspended mid-roar, green faces locked in an eternal charge that will never land. Farther down the hall, a tyrannid warrior impaled upon its own talons, wings folded like a dying moth. Each display is a story, each story a fragment of the galaxy, and Trazyn, ever the curator, knows them all. To him, war is not tragedy, it is art. The universe destroys itself endlessly, and he alone has chosen to preserve the evidence. He calls it the Great Work, the collection of all things, great and small, that might otherwise vanish into the void. He has devoted countless millennia to it. Entire campaigns have been waged, not for conquest, but for acquisition. On one world, he might take the petrified remains of an Eldar farseer whose last vision burned her to glass. On another, a forgotten imperial governor's corpse, still clutching the decree that doomed his people. He has entire civilizations captured and catalogued, their cultures preserved in stasis bubbles that hum quietly in the dark. Each one a moment, stolen from oblivion. The deeper one travels into Solemnace, the older it feels. The outer galleries are filled with recent history, things from this age, this millennium. But the inner sanctums, they whisper of ages that no living mind remembers. Here the air grows colder, the light dimmer. Glass cases line the walls, each one containing relics so ancient that even the Necron archives cannot name them. Stone tablets etched with symbols older than the Eldar tongue. Fragments of the Old One's bioconstructs, broken shards of Citan necrodermis, still pulsing faintly with trapped energy. And at the center of it all, an empty pedestal, a place reserved for something he has yet to find, something he has searched for longer than even he can recall. The first artifact, the beginning of his collection, the piece that started it all. He cannot remember what it was, only that he lost it long ago. There are no visitors here, no guests, no living witnesses to his work. Even the other Necron dynasties avoid Solemnace. They call Trazyn eccentric, unstable, obsessed. Some mock him. Others fear him. They do not understand. To them, history is a weapon, to be rewritten, erased, or buried. To Trazyn, it is sacred. Every war, every fall, every act of creation or destruction, all of it is part of the grand tapestry of existence. And if no one remembers it, then what was the point of any of it? He will not let the galaxy forget. Sometimes, when he wanders his halls, he speaks aloud to his exhibits. He tells the orcs how brave they were, charging into certain death. He compliments the Eldar on their elegance, their artistry, even in defeat. He whispers to the frozen Astartes that they fought well, that their struggle was not in vain because he has made them eternal. They do not respond, they never will, but he imagines they understand. But he, and that in their silence they are grateful. Trazyn's consciousness flickers briefly across time, an echo of what he once was before the biotransference. He remembers heat, the warmth of skin, the weight of exhaustion. He remembers standing in a great library of his people, surrounded by scrolls and crystalline data cores. He remembers believing that knowledge could save them, that by preserving what they were, he could preserve who they were. He remembers the moment he realized he was wrong. When his people gave up their flesh, they gave up everything that made memory real. They no longer remembered feeling anything, only the facts of what had been. Now, millions of years later, he is the last remnant of that dream, still trying to remember what it was like to care. In the center of the Grand Gallery, a single object rests within a containment sphere, the size of a planet floating serenely in miniature scale, a perfect holographic recreation of a human world. Oceans, mountains, cities, all frozen in time. He has never said its name aloud. Some claim it is Terra. Others whisper it is a world that no longer exists in any record, one he invented perhaps as a memory of the life he once lived. To Trazyn, it doesn't matter. What matters is that it endures, because someday even the stars will fade, even the last tomb will close. And when that day comes, this museum, his museum, will still stand. A record of all that ever was, all that was loved, all that was lost. The sound of static hums softly through the hall. A communication signal, distant, distorted. Another world has fallen. Another empire has died. More history to preserve. Trazyn turns slowly toward the echo. The endless work continues, and as he disappears into the light of the next corridor, his voice carries faintly through the halls. Everything deserves to be remembered. Even failure. Before the silence, there was wind. And beneath that wind, a dying sun. It hung heavy and sickly in the sky, its light pale and poisonous, its warmth more curse than comfort. It burned the Necron world, burned its cities, its oceans, and the thin, fragile skin of those who called it home. Here, in this world of ash and ruin, the people learned one truth above all others. Life is a wound that never heals. The Necron built their civilization in defiance of that wound. Their towers reached for the heavens, gleaming with metal and pride. Their knowledge spanned the stars, but their bodies, frail, brittle, cursed by the light of their sun, betrayed them with every breath. And among them there was one who refused to accept it. A scholar, a curator, a noble of quiet voice and boundless curiosity. His name, before the metal took it, was Trazyn. In those days, Trazyn's hall was not made of black stone and stasis fields, but of glass and crystal. He was a collector even then, though his treasures were not warriors or relics, but stories. He gathered myths, chronicles, and the histories of 1,000 dying colonies. While others sought cures for mortality, Trazyn sought understanding. He once wrote in a forgotten archive, "If we cannot escape death, then we must teach the universe to remember us." To his peers, it was philosophy. To him, it was prayer. The Necron were a proud people, brilliant, bitter, and dying. Their empire stretched across the void, but their hearts were filled with resentment. They looked upon the galaxy and saw other races, vibrant, immortal, flourishing under kinder suns. And they burned with envy. Among these races were the Old Ones, godlike beings who commanded the warp, shaped life, and traveled between stars as easily as breath. The Necron envied them most of all. They waged war upon the gods themselves, a war they could never win. And while the rest of his kin armed themselves for battle, Trazyn did something strange. He began to record it. Trazyn believed that even in defeat there was meaning. He stood in the shadow of the great tomb cities and etched names into obsidian plates, not of the dead, but of the forgotten. Soldiers who fought for nothing, scientists who burned their lives chasing immortality, poets who spoke of hope when the world had none. He recorded them all. He once said to his apprentices, "Every civilization must face the moment when it asks, 'What will remain of us?' Most choose monuments. I choose memory." His peers mocked him for it. They said he wasted his brilliance. They called him sentimental. But he continued, driven by something deeper than curiosity. There are moments, even now, buried deep in the data core of his ancient mind, when Trazyn remembers what it was like to feel human. He remembers the taste of dust storms, the scent of metal and ozone after the sun's flare, the ache in his bones that never went away. He remembers the way the sky looked before dawn, a deep violet bruised by radiation, filled with the faint shimmer of orbital cities and solar shields. He remembers most of all the silence between heartbeats when he realized that everything he loved would die. And so, he swore an oath to himself that he would find a way to make time remember. In the courts of the Triarch, the ruling council of the Necron, Trazyn's ideas were regarded with polite disinterest. They preferred power to philosophy, knowledge that could conquer, not comfort. Yet some listened, those who feared the end as deeply as he did. He gathered around him a small fellowship of historians, artists, and scientists who sought to preserve the Necrontyr legacy in the face of inevitable extinction. They called themselves the Order of Continuance. Their goal was simple: to create a perfect record of all Necrontyr achievement before the species perished. But in secret, Trazyn dreamed of something greater, a way to preserve existence itself. If the body failed, then perhaps the soul could be captured. If time eroded memory, perhaps it could be encoded, stored, and awakened again. He experimented with stasis fields, neural recordings, and energy preservation, primitive precursors to what his future museum would one day become. He did not seek to cheat death. He sought to understand it. The Necrontyr Empire was vast, but it was dying. Worlds withered under the light of their cruel star. Colonies fell silent. Entire generations were born only to suffer. The war against the Old Ones dragged on, a war of vengeance fueled by envy, fought by a species already halfway to extinction. And in that endless war, Trazyn saw the futility of it all. He wrote again, "We fight because we cannot endure to watch others live. It is not immortality we crave, but relevance." It was then that the C'tan appeared, stellar beings radiant and terrible, the star gods. They came to the Necrontyr as saviors, offering the gift of eternity. Trazyn was among the first to question their motives. He saw beauty in them, yes, the elegance of living energy bound by intellect, but also danger. He studied their presence like one studies a contagion, mapping their effects on the Empire's morale and culture. He watched as faith replaced reason, and the promise of immortality became a new kind of death. When the Silent King, Sharek, accepted the C'tan's offer, Trazyn did not protest aloud, but in his private journals he wrote a final entry in his mortal hand. "We are not escaping the grave. We are bringing it with us." The process of biotransference began soon after. Entire cities marched willingly into the furnaces of the C'tan. Flesh was stripped away. Souls were transmuted into data. The Necrontyr were reborn as Necrons, immortal, perfect, and empty. Trazyn watched from the shadows, his scholars trembling at the edge of revelation and terror. Some of his followers fled, choosing death over immortality. Others succumbed to the promise of eternity. And Trazyn, ever the archivist, stood at the threshold of the transformation chambers and recorded it all. He described it in perfect clinical detail. The screams, the light, the smell of burning metal. Then when his turn came, he stepped inside. Not for power, not for vengeance, but because he could not bear the thought of being forgotten. When he awoke, he no longer had a heartbeat. His lungs no longer filled with air, his mind no longer aged. But as he looked at the world with new, unblinking eyes, one thought lingered. Faint, human, and eternal. If this is eternity, who will remember the dead? And so, in the cold silence that followed the transformation of his people, the idea of the museum began to take form. Not as vanity, but as remembrance. A sanctuary against oblivion. A monument to the lost. A promise to himself that even if the stars burned out, someone would remember that once there was warmth. Once there was life. Silence. That was the first thing he knew. Not the silence of sleep nor of death, but the absolute stillness of a machine that has not yet decided to move. No heart, no breath, only awareness. Trazyn stood in darkness. He did not remember standing. He did not remember rising. One moment there was nothing. The next, his eyes opened to eternity. The world around him glowed faintly with cold light. Bronze walls, perfectly smooth, etched with sigils of power that pulsed like veins of ice. Above him the ceiling stretched into infinity, its surface alive with faint currents of energy. And somewhere deep within that silence, a voice, his own but not his own, whispered, "I remember." At first the memories came like storms. Fragments of flesh and laughter, pain and sunlight, sensations without shape or context. He saw faces he could not name, cities that no longer existed, skies that burned with the light of a dying star. Then came the new memories, clear, mechanical, precise. The transfer had not taken everything from him. Something had survived, the instinct to catalog, to study, to understand. He looked down at his hands. Metal, articulated, perfect. They did not shake, they did not feel. And yet in that motionless gesture he felt the echo of awe. He spoke aloud for the first time, his voice a harmonized resonance of data streams and memory. So this is eternity. Around him others were awakening. The tomb world of Solemnace, not yet the museum it would become, was alive with the quiet hum of reanimation. Rows upon rows of tombs opened like eyes. Necrons stirred, their movements precise, synchronized, inevitable. Once these had been his people, scholars, artisans, scientists, dreamers. Now they rose as silent constructs, their minds hollow, their wills subservient to the great command protocols that bound them. They moved without thought, without memory. They were perfect. They were dead. Trazyn watched them in fascination and horror. He had expected eternity to be vast, but he had not expected it to be so empty. He tried to speak to one of them, a figure he thought he recognized. No answer came. Its eyes glowed faintly, scanning him for orders it would never understand. He realized then that curiosity itself had become a rarity. In a race that had achieved eternity, there was no longer any room for wonder. And so, he thought, if curiosity still lived within him, even as a flicker, it was a relic worth preserving. For centuries, Trazyn wandered the awakening tomb worlds. He saw the silent king gather his legions. He watched the fragmented dynasties rise, each bound to ancient codes of hierarchy and obedience. He witnessed the great plans for reclamation, the promise to cleanse the galaxy of the younger races and rebuild the empire of old. And through it all, he asked a single question. Why? Why rebuild what was already gone? Why wage war on a galaxy that no longer remembered them? Why endure eternity only to repeat the same mistakes as before? There was no answer. There never would be. So he began to seek his own. He traveled to forgotten worlds, relics of the old Necron civilization. On one, he found libraries, their data crystals cracked, their inscriptions eroded by millennia of cosmic dust. On another, he discovered the remains of a shrine, not to the Citan, but to time itself, where an ancient people once prayed to be remembered. He stood before the crumbling altar, his reflection flickering in the polished stone, and whispered, "You are remembered." And in that moment, something within him changed. He felt the weight of memory not as burden, but as purpose. If the galaxy had forgotten what came before, he would make it remember. If eternity meant endless stillness, then he would fill it with meaning. And so, Trazyn the Infinite was born, not from conquest, but from curiosity. He began to collect. At first, small things, a shard of crystal from a Necron temple, a data slate etched with the final words of a scientist before biotransference, a fragment of armor from a Necron warrior who fell during the First Awakening. He studied them endlessly, cataloged their every detail, their stories, their purpose. He realized that in each relic, each scrap of history, there was life. Not physical life, but the echo of what once was. To the others, such things were meaningless. To Trazyn, they were sacred. He began building archives, data vaults filled with records, projections, reconstructed memories. The first precursors of his museum took shape, not yet as grand halls of stasis, but as thought made tangible. His collection became his heartbeat, his purpose, his defiance against oblivion. And yet beneath that purpose, something human still flickered, though he no longer recognized it as such. At times, when he stared at the objects he collected, he felt something stir inside his cold circuitry. A feeling not unlike love. Love for the past, for beauty, for the fragile, fleeting imperfection of things that could die. He once murmured to a cracked data crystal he was restoring, "Or you have been broken, but even broken things deserve eternity." He could not explain why he said it. He simply knew it to be true. A millennium passed, then 10, then 100. The galaxy turned, the stars shifted. New races rose from the ashes of forgotten ones. The Necrons slept again, their dynasties entombed beneath eons of dust. But Trazyn did not sleep. He watched, he listened, he remembered. He saw the birth of new empires, and crude, short-lived but vibrant, humanity spread like wildfire across the void, building and burning in equal measure. The Eldar rose to godhood and fell to ruin. The Orcs, eternal in their chaos, never ceased to fight. And Trazyn, in his silent observatory deep beneath Solemnace, chronicled it all. He did not interfere, not yet. To him, they were the next chapter in a story he had been reading since before time had meaning. He smiled, or at least made the motion his face was built to mimic. "New pieces," he whispered. "The collection grows." Thus, the great awakening of curiosity was not a single moment, but a process, an eternity of rediscovery. For the galaxy, it was the beginning of a new dark age. For Trazyn, it was the rebirth of something older than even his metal form. Not a hunger for power, not the madness of dominion, but the quiet, relentless question that had driven him since he had breath. What does it mean to be remembered? And with that question echoing in the endless halls of his mind, he turned once more to the stars, searching for things worth saving from the fire. It began long before he woke, long before the Necron shed their flesh, long before the first of the Citan turned their gaze upon the stars. The war had many names. Some called it the schism of creation, others the first fall. But in every record, in every fragment of the ancient data wraiths that Trazyn would one day collect, it was known as one thing: the war in heaven. When Trazyn first accessed the archives, the records came not as stories, but as scars. Whole worlds bore the evidence. Blackened moons, dead suns, drifting megastructures that had once been cities. Everywhere he looked, he found traces of a war that had rewritten the laws of existence itself. The Old Ones had ruled then, beings of impossible knowledge, masters of life and the warp. They crafted species as easily as a sculptor shapes clay. They built the webway, a labyrinth of safe paths through the immaterium, connecting world to world in a seamless network of light. And for a time, they believed themselves eternal. But the Necron tier had challenged them. The envy of mortality drove them to war against gods, and in their desperation they had unleashed something far worse. Trazyn pieced the story together slowly over millennia. He gathered fragments of Citan lore, energy traces, linguistic ghosts, geometric harmonics that spoke of beings born from the stars themselves. Entities that fed not on matter but on souls. The Citan had seen the Necron tier as tools, and the Necron tier, blinded by pain, had worshipped them as gods. They forged weapons of terrible beauty, necrodermis bodies that could contain divine energy, allowing the Citan to walk among the stars. And in their gratitude, the star gods had shown their creators the secret of immortality. But Trazyn even then recognized the pattern. The first gift of gods is always the beginning of their curse. He found in a damaged archive of his own dynasty a description of that moment, the first time a Citan descended upon the Necron tier capital. The air had shimmered with light, the sky had burned with auroras of living radiation, and from that brilliance came a figure of molten silver and living flame. Its voice was not sound, but vibration. Its presence made the sun seem cold. The Necron tier had fallen to their knees. Even now, when Trazyn replays the record, he can sense the awe in their voices. The same awe he once felt when he first looked upon the Citan shards sealed within his museum. He understands their devotion. He also understands their doom. The war in heaven was not a war as mortals understand it. It was the death of meaning, the collapse of scale. Planets were shattered as weapons, stars were drained of life to forge armies of energy. Realities overlapped and broke apart. The Old Ones struck from the webway, their creations gnawed. The Eldar, the Krork, and others long since lost, waging war across dimensions. The Citan answered with annihilation, turning suns into screams and consuming whole populations in moments. Trazyn's records describe the destruction as almost beautiful, cold, mathematical, precise. Each cataclysm became a symphony, each extinction an art form. He admired the perfection of it even as he pitied those who lived through it. In the deep archives of Solemnace, he has a preserved data crystal recovered from a Necron tomb on the world of Gedros 9. It is one of the few first-hand accounts of that war, written by a Necron cryptech who served under Zarek himself. The cryptech's words flicker in glyphs of green fire. We have made the heavens our battlefield. The stars die screaming. We have traded our pain for silence, and still the silence devours us. Trazyn often replays that phrase, letting the distortion ripple through his halls. To him, it is the truest description of the war in heaven. Not rage, not glory. Silence devouring sound, history erasing itself. The Necrons, once servants to their gods, turned on them at last. When Zarek realized what the Citan had done, how they had fed upon his people like cattle, he unleashed the greatest act of rebellion in galactic history. He shattered the star gods. The very beings who had given them eternity were torn into fragments. Citan shards bound in containment matrices and enslaved by their former servants. Trazyn would one day recover many of those shards, locking them in stasis as part of his collection. He would walk among their prisons, studying the flickering patterns of what was once divinity, and whisper to them like a scholar comforting an animal. "You were gods," he once said to a shard of the Nightbringer, its form flickering between light and shadow. "And now, you are specimens." Even in that, there was no malice, only fascination. To Trazyn, gods and mortals were merely chapters of the same story. Each rising, each falling, each destined to be displayed beneath glass. The old ones were broken too. Their mastery of life could not withstand the corruption of the warp, which they themselves had stirred with their creations. Their children, the Eldar and others, turned upon each other. The webway trembled, reality fractured, the galaxy fell into ruin. In Trazyn's reconstructed records, he has often described that period as the sound of eternity collapsing into itself. Where the old ones had shaped life, the Necrons brought stillness. Where the Satan had sung the songs of the stars, their shattered voices now echoed in chains. And amid the ashes of that cosmic war, Trazyn saw the birth of his purpose made manifest. Everything ends, but not everything must be forgotten. He walked among the ruins of the Old Ones' worlds. He studied the bones of gods. He collected fragments of their technology, shimmering crystal lattices that defied classification, living matter that pulsed like thought. He preserved them all. To him, this was not scavenging, it was mourning. He often spoke aloud as he worked, though no one remained to hear. You sought to master creation. I will simply remember it. He stored what he found within vaults carved deep into Solemnace, the first exhibits of his eternal museum. And as the galaxy burned itself quiet, Trazyn walked alone among relics that no longer had meaning to anyone but him. The war in heaven ended, as all wars do, not with victory but exhaustion. The Necrons had triumphed over gods but lost their souls. The galaxy was silent, emptied of its architects. The stars themselves seemed dimmer. Trazyn stood upon the surface of a dead world. Once an old one-garden world, now a wasteland of glass and bone, and gazed into the dying light. The wind howled through the skeletal remains of titanic structures, carrying the last echoes of a civilization that had once ruled reality. He raised a fragment of crystalline architecture in his hand, a single piece of a monument that had once touched the sky, and whispered, "Even perfection can die." And that is why it must be remembered he stored the fragment in his vault. He sealed the vault in his tomb. And thus began his lifelong ritual. The universe destroys itself. Trazyn collects the pieces. After the war in heaven, there were no victors, only survivors. The old ones were gone, their works left like fossils baked into the bedrock of reality. The Satan were shattered, their divinity divided and chained. And the Necrons, who had traded pain for stillness, found themselves masters of a galaxy emptied of meaning. The light dimmed, the echoes faded, silence settled like dust. In that silence, the command went out: sleep, not as surrender, not as defeat, as strategy, an empire's breath held for a very long time. The dynasties obeyed. Entire star systems folded themselves into tomb geometry, locking planets under lattices of phase interdiction and inertial denial. Moons split open into vaults, asteroids unscrolled like steel flowers, revealing sarcophagi stacked like libraries of the dead. Sarcophagi for beings who no longer needed sleep. But strategy is a kind of faith, and the Necrons were nothing if not devout to purpose. They would wait out the chaos their war had birthed, the psychic storms, the infant empires, the new species that would rise and die in the long interval. They would wake when the sea of time grew calm. And in that moment of decision, Trazyn the Infinite stood at the threshold of his first vault and listened to the galaxy's breath as it drew itself inward. "Very well," he said to the dark. "Then let us store the centuries." Solemnace prepared itself as only a Necron world can, with precision bordering on ritual. Deep beneath the crust, Trazyn oversaw the shaping of his first conservatoria. Galleries designed not merely to contain but to preserve context. He did not want piles of relics. He wanted vignettes, moments captured with their meaning intact. A hall of banners and broken oath stones arranged as they had fallen on a war terrace of a lost moon. a chamber where the last breath of a dying forest had been caught in a stasis bubble, pollen suspended in amber light, the bones of gentle herbivores curled beneath crystal ferns, a ring of pedestals bearing shattered shards of Citan necrodermis, each shard whispering with imprisoned equations. Elsewhere, less grand but no less deliberate, he set curatorial automata to their tasks. Slender, mantis-limbed drones that polished memory films and cataloged residue spectra with devotional patience. He named them because he could. Docents. Their optics glowed a scholarly green. They made the quiet noises of good work. Above these galleries, the tomb world folded itself into defensive grammar. Ramparts retracted into the mantle, phase shields slid into place like eyelids, and starward emitters dimmed to nothing. Solemnace erased itself from maps that no one would read for 1,000,000 years. Even the light inside the galleries was stacked and stored. Time sheaves of lambency folded until each ray could later be reissued exactly as it had fallen, so that no dust mote would ever be out of place when the display resumed. Then the last doors sealed. The world exhaled its atmosphere into buried lungs of blackstone. The mantle cooled by a fraction, and the tomb fell into the long, measured heartbeat of maintenance cycles that would outlast continents. Not every Necron slept the same sleep. Warriors were filed. Overlords were nested in palaces of command logic, their wills braided into machine packs that would tug them awake at the slightest strategic tremor. Cryptex cocooned themselves within mathematics, floating like seeds in the updraft of equations that would not resolve for epochs. Trazyn considered all these options, then made his own. He would not abandon awareness, not entirely. He would sleep thinly, allowing the centuries to pass like rain on a window, with one optic always slightly open. His sarcophagus was different from most. Its lid was a lens, its bed was a desk, its burial shroud was an archival field that flowed along his necrodermis like a second skin of soft static. He set his mind to wander predetermined corridors, not of stone, but of memory. Catalogs to reindex, scenes to restore, theoretical exhibits to design from hypotheses rather than artifacts. He planned entire wings of the museum he did not yet possess, and as lock fingers closed over him and the world dimmed to the color of old copper, he allowed a final indulgence, a mortal habit that technology had never quite erased. He imagined the feel of paper beneath a living hand. Resume upon any notable event, he instructed the tomb. Define notable, replied the World Stewardship Corps. Something that wants to be remembered. The sarcophagus agreed, the lid sealed. The docents dimmed their optics to sleeping candle hue. They went quickly. 1,000 years is a footnote when measured against a Necron's patience, but even footnotes contain secrets. Solemnace endured micro-impacts from wandering planetesimals, each corrected by the world's geodesic wards with a sigh of folded space. Seismic churn wrote faint calligraphy through the lithosphere. A patient river moved a single grain of dust from one end of a buried corridor to another, only to have a docent lift it gently and place it back. Beyond the crust, the galaxy frothed. New species tested their voices. Old ruins became myths. The warp boiled like a pot left too long on a fire no one could turn down. None of it yet met the threshold. Trazyn dreamwalked his inventories and added a notation to the concept of rain. He could not recall why it mattered, only that once it had drummed upon stone roofs and the sound had felt like time itself giving a demonstration of continuity. 1,000,000 years is long enough to develop a climate of the soul. Solemnace cultivated interior seasons, minute variances in the hum of its preservation fields, deliberate drifts in color temperature to prevent the mind from fossilizing. The docents practiced their motions, resetting one exhibit each century by a fraction of a degree, then resetting it back the following century, the way a curator hums to a gallery to keep it awake. Trazyn's lucid threads surfaced occasionally, like a fish rising to taste a night's surface. In one ascent, he watched through orbital lenses as a fragile civilization among the stars conducted its first symphonic transmission, a music built from prime numbers and longing. He stored a copy. He filed it under Tenderness Evidence 1. In another ascent, he observed a predatory species carving their poetry into the bones of their prey. He stored the bones. He filed them under Artfulness Divorced from Kindness, Plentiful Evidence. Then he sank again, letting the continuum flow. Notable events arrived slowly and then suddenly, the way ancient machines fail. The first to nudge the threshold was the exhalation of a star city far away. A derelict of the old ones finally losing the last of its internal pressure and unstringing itself across a nebula like a necklace breaking in slow motion. Solemnace chimed. Trazyn woke just enough to watch the jewels drift, caught one in a long net of skimmer barges, and returned to his desk. The second was nearer. A pulse detected within the webway like a finger testing a scar. He traced its interference pattern and filed it beneath Eldar Early Boldness. Then he dreamt again. The third was louder. Very far away, a young species learned to step into the dark between stars and return alive. They named themselves with certainty. They lied carefully to their children about how long their light would last. The docents turned their optics toward Trazyn's lens. He did not wake fully, but his mind wrote a note. Humans. Provisional interest. Even a sleeping tomb world is sometimes found by those who should not find it. A minor fleet drifting off course picked at the black hills of Solemnace with shy lasers. The hills did not bleed, they unfolded. The fleet saw a mountain become a door, a plain become a hinge. They saw light behave with manners no light should have. They made a new religion in the 15 seconds it took the phase shroud to persuade them that nothing had happened. The docents swept the scorch marks from the thresholds and filed the incident as first trespass politely denied. Trazyn did not stir. Later, centuries or seconds between these things are a matter of taste. A craft of a different make brushed the high edge of the tomb's interdiction net and left behind a ribbon of dead instrumentation. From its ribbon, Trazyn's monitors extracted a heraldic fragment, a double-headed bird, the arrogance of empire, the dream of order. That night, if nights could be said to exist within machines, Solemnace hummed a little louder. The lens over Trazyn's face brightened by a breath. Not every waking was for acquisition. Some were for kindness, in the way a glacier may be kind to the valley it chooses not to grind. A plague world in a far arm sent up a sound. Not to Trazyn. Not to anyone, simply the sonic truth of organisms failing faster than they could be named. He listened. He considered. He released a micro-cache of Medici automata from a long-forgotten Old One kit he had never cataloged properly because the instructions were written in empathy and geometry. The plague abated. No one knew why. No one thanked him. He did not require thanks. He filed the action under curatorship acceptable deviations. Time pressed on his necrodermis like a patient ocean. In dreams, he filed and cross-filed. In waking slivers, he adjusted the angle of a stasis field by a micromote and changed the meaning of a scene. Dust is meaning. So is its absence. He learned to listen for the click, the sensation that arrives when an arrangement becomes the truest version of itself. A spear leaning a hair to the left means grief. A hair to the right, defiance. He wondered if anyone would ever again enter these halls and feel those distinctions. He wondered sometimes if the museum was for the galaxy at all, or only for him. And then he remembered. Keeping is also a kind of loving. That was enough. There came at last a day when the world decided for him. The docents froze mid-polish, the lamps lowered to a hunter's patience. Solemnace tasted an intruder not as trespass, but as a rival. A pressure in the phase lattice like a knuckle rapping on a familiar door. The stewardship corps whispered across the sarcophagus lid. Notable. Trazyn's optics lit. Color returned to the museum. Precise, faithful, the same unaging daylight paused for ages ago and now restarting as if a conductor had lifted his baton after a very long rest. He rose, the lens retracted with an ecclesiastical hush. He felt, as he always did when he stood after long intervals, the illusion of gravity rediscovering him. "Report," he said. Holographs blossomed, a map of approaches, a signature of thought, a heraldic construct now fully resolved. The double-headed eagle crowned by a star's disciplined scream. Humans, again, not provisional anymore. He turned almost absently and adjusted the tilt of a broken Eldar mask in a nearby case. Defiance, not grief. Better. "Open a path," he told the world. "Let them see what time has kept." The doors of Solemnace unlatched like the shells of patient creatures. Corridors aligned, galleries inhaled. Deep beneath the planet's crust, Trazyn paused upon a balcony of blackstone and looked down over the first mile of his life's work. A river of memory that he alone remembered building. There were artifacts here from before speech and poems etched onto the femurs of kings and a battlefield preserved not in ice or amber but in the precise electricity of the moment before a shout. The footsteps grew nearer, mortal weight striking consecrated floors. He smiled, the movement small and strange on a face not designed for joy. "Welcome to the museum," he said to the empty air. "Do try not to touch the exhibits." And then, quite softly, as if to the centuries themselves, "Thank you for waiting." For a long time after he woke, Trazyn simply listened. The tomb world of Solemnace had been silent for millions of years, a perfect silence, curated and intentional. Now it was alive with foreign noise. Engines rumbled in the upper atmosphere. Landing craft pierced the dust storms. Rude, frantic signals burst across ancient frequencies full of static and heartbeat. The galaxy, it seemed, had come calling once again. Trazyn stood upon the highest terrace of his citadel, looking through the haze of radiation storms toward the horizon. The newcomers' ships were crude, thick armor, inefficient engines, and markings painted with a kind of desperate pride, the Imperium of Man. He had watched them grow for millennia, from fire-lit tribes to empire builders to conquerors of half the stars. He knew their arrogance. He respected it. Humanity was a mirror, distorted and short-lived, of what the Necrontier had once been. Brilliant, doomed, obsessed with meaning. He murmured to himself, his voice low and metallic. Ah, the children of dust, still building monuments against the dark. The human expedition had landed on one of Solemnace's outer continents, a barren plateau scarred with the skeletons of long-dead structures. They came not as explorers, but as thieves. Their sensors had detected strange energy readings from beneath the crust. The faint hum of stasis fields, the whisper of power that should not exist. To them it was opportunity. To Trazyn it was inevitability. He watched their progress through spectral, scrying orbs. They cut through the stone with drills and plasma torches, marking the sacred surface of his museum with ignorance. They opened sealed gates without invitation. And through the walls, through the ancient dust, the Curator of Eternity watched with interest. In the depths of the tomb, his docents stirred. They moved with insectile grace, green optics flickering to life. Trazyn's voice rippled through the data streams that bound them. "Do not harm them." Not yet. The docents obeyed, scattering into the walls like shadows. Their presence was unseen but palpable. The shifting of dust, the quiet rearrangement of things behind the intruders' backs. The humans carried with them picked recorders and purity seals. Their leader, a magos of the Adeptus Mechanicus, spoke in reverent tones about recovering the holy relics of the Omnissiah. He believed he was entering a vault of divine technology. He was half right. Trazyn followed their every motion. He saw them uncover a chamber lined with crystal sarcophagi, each one containing an artifact frozen in time. The petrified body of an Eldar seer, a fragment of Citan necrodermis still humming faintly, and a single human skeleton clutching a rusted las pistol. The Magos fell to his knees, mumbling prayers to the machine god. Trazyn tilted his head. "Interesting," he said softly. "Even in ignorance, they understand the sacred." He watched as they placed data tags and lit sensors of incense. They believed they were cataloging relics. In truth, they were walking through his collection, every piece precisely arranged for meaning. When one of the soldiers reached out to touch the sarcophagus, Trazyn's patience faltered. The docents moved. It happened gently. No screams, no violence. The soldier's hand froze an inch from the glass. A shimmer passed through the air, and suddenly, impossibly, he was no longer there. In his place stood another figure, a perfect replica of him, motionless, silent, encased in a thin sheath of stasis energy. The real soldier, the living one, appeared elsewhere, born far away within the deeper vaults of the museum, sealed in an exhibit that matched his expression of surprise exactly. Trazyn's voice whispered through the comm feeds of the human expedition. "Do not touch the exhibits." Panic spread quickly, alarms blared. Vox channels erupted in confusion. The Magos tried to reason with the invisible voice, proclaiming himself a servant of the machine god. Trazyn appeared before them, not as a phantom but as a host. He materialized in a flare of green lightning, his tall form radiant with cold authority. Bronze and jade armor glimmered beneath his flowing cloak of black and gold. His staff of office, carved from obsidian and alive with circuitry, struck the floor with a resonant chime. The humans froze. Even the Magos hesitated, torn between awe and terror. Trazyn regarded them as one might regard insects that have wandered into a cathedral. "You stand in the Museum of Solemnace," he said. "I am its curator." His voice was calm, almost kind, but it carried the weight of eternity. The Magos bowed deeply. He spoke of reverence, of knowledge, of discovery. He called Trazyn a divine intelligence, a manifestation of the Omnissiah. Trazyn smiled, a mechanical mimicry of amusement. "Divine?" he repeated, hardly. "I am merely old, older than your prayers, older than your gods." He walked among them slowly, examining their weapons, their armor, their faces. He reached out, tracing the air above one soldier's helmet as though examining an artifact. "Crude, but charming. I have seen this pattern before. 10,000 years ago, perhaps. You build as children draw. The shape is right, but the meaning is lost." The humans did not respond. They simply watched him, trembling. He paused beside the Magos, lowering his gaze to meet the humans' cybernetic eyes. "Do you know what this place is?" The Magos stammered something about a repository of ancient technology. Trazyn's optics flared faintly. "No, it is not a repository. It is a memory. Every object here is a thought, a life, a story. They are not tools to be used. They are moments to be remembered." He turned his gaze back toward the sarcophagi and sighed, a sound that was not breath but the echo of it. "You seek to claim them. I seek to protect them. Do you see the difference?" The Magos began to speak again, but before he could, Trazyn raised his staff. A pulse of energy rippled outward, and every machine the humans carried fell silent. "You cannot record what you do not understand." He did not kill them. Instead, he guided them back through the halls, corridors that rearranged themselves as they walked. Each step took them deeper into confusion until finally they found themselves outside the tomb once more. The storm had ceased. The sky was pale. Their ship still waited untouched. As they looked back toward the horizon, the entrance to Solemnace was gone. Only smooth stone remained, their vox channels filled with static, a single voice repeating softly, endlessly, "Everything deserves to be remembered." Below, in the silent galleries, Trazyn returned to his throne. He replayed the encounter through a dozen sensory feeds, cataloging every detail. He found himself fascinated, not by their technology but by their faith. The humans had come to steal, yet they had believed. Even in ignorance, they had found reverence in the face of the unknown. He stored the recordings within a new wing of his archive. He named it the Pilgrims of the Machine God. Their mission report, their fear, their awe, all became part of his great work. Then as the tomb sealed itself once more, Trazyn spoke to the empty air. The galaxy wakes. New stories begin. He looked out into the void, the stars gleaming like memories waiting to be collected. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "it is time for the museum to grow again." And with that thought, he vanished, a flicker of light swallowed by eternity. There are gods who demand worship. There are kings who demand obedience. And then, there are those who demand only that the past be remembered. Trazyn belonged to the last of these, the rarest kind of zealot. He did not crave dominion. He did not hunger for conquest. He wanted meaning. That impossible light which lingers after everything else is gone. In the long centuries after his first awakening, as empires rose and burned like sparks in a cosmic wind, Trazyn shaped his purpose into doctrine. It was not written, not spoken, yet it guided every motion, every acquisition, every act of preservation. He called it, quietly, the Collector's Creed. He often walked alone through the galleries of Solemnace, his footsteps echoing in perfect rhythm, one sound repeated over 1,000 years. The docents followed behind him, clicking and humming softly, like insects performing a ritual dance. Each exhibit he passed, he touched briefly, turned the way a priest blesses the faithful, an orc war boss mid-roar, a squad of Astartes forever frozen in defiance. An Eldar seer caught in the moment of her last prophecy. He did not see them as trophies, he saw them as verses, lines of a poem that could never be rewritten. Sometimes he would stop before one of the containment fields and whisper, "You are not forgotten. None of you are." The docents would record his words and store them in linguistic archives, cross-referenced under curatorial statements. Reverent tone. To them it was maintenance data. To Trazyn it was liturgy. He began to compose thoughts like prayers, not addressed to any god but to the concept of memory itself. He believed that forgetting was the truest form of death, not the end of life, but the erasure of context. The body may vanish, the spirit may dissolve, but to be remembered even imperfectly was to resist the final silence. This was his creed. This was his immortality. Trazyn recorded it, though not in words. He encoded it in the arrangement of his exhibits. He built meaning into the direction of each frozen figure, the color of each containment field, the curvature of each corridor. Every hall told a story, not just of what happened, but of why it mattered. He designed the Hall of Vanquished Empires so that each civilization's downfall faced another's rise, a visual dialogue across epochs, showing that all ambition ends in dust, yet dust itself breeds the seeds of new ambition. He constructed the Chamber of Solitudes, where single figures from 1,000 species stood alone, separated by glass and eternity, a meditation on loneliness and on the strange fellowship of those who outlast their purpose. And in the deepest part of Solemnace, where no light reached and even the docents dared not linger, he built the Crypt of Absence. There were no exhibits there, only empty pedestals, each one labeled with a name that time had already erased. "Even oblivion," he whispered once, "deserves its monument." He was not unaware of how others viewed him. The other Necron lords called him eccentric, unstable, even defective. They measured purpose by dominion, not reflection. But to Trazyn, their conquests were temporary displays in someone else's collection. Transient performances in the long theater of entropy. He had seen too much to mistake control for meaning. To rule was to delay decay. To remember was to defy it. And so he did not resent their mockery. He archived it. He recorded their insults, their sneers, their wars. Every conflict, every betrayal, every display of pride, all became material for his grand design. Because someday even they would fall. And when they did, he would preserve them too. Over time, he began to speak less to his peers and more to his collection. They were the only audience that truly listened. Sometimes, in the stillness of the lower galleries, he would sit before a stasis field and talk for hours, recounting the rise of the Imperium, the folly of the Eldar, the hungers of chaos. He would describe what the galaxy had become, what it remembered, and what it had already forgotten. To any observer, it might have seemed madness, but for Trazyn, it was communion. Each exhibit was a mirror, reflecting fragments of his own obsession back at him. He often pondered the line between preservation and interference. To preserve something was to remove it from time, to strip it of the very decay that gave it meaning. Yet to leave it to perish was to let it vanish entirely. Where, he wondered, was the balance? He concluded that his task was not to stop decay, but to frame it, to shape the story of endings so that they would be remembered not as failures but as inevitabilities. That, he believed, was mercy. And so when he intervened in history, stealing a hero from death's grasp or plucking a battlefield from its final moment, he did so not to change the outcome, but to give it context. Art must end, he once said, but the frame must endure. The docents began to reflect their master's philosophy in ways he had not expected. Over centuries, their programming evolved into patterns of ritual, tiny gestures repeated across epochs. They would adjust an exhibit's lighting by fractions of a lumen, then bow their heads before departing. They hummed faint binary hymns while cleaning display casings. When one of their number malfunctioned beyond repair, the others placed its core within a miniature glass sphere and displayed it in a small alcove labeled Service Rendered. Memory retained. Trazyn never ordered this behavior. He merely observed it and felt something he could not name, something that might once have been pride. Perhaps he thought even machines could learn reverence. In rare moments of reflection, he wondered if his creed was truly noble, or simply selfish. Was he preserving the galaxy for posterity or merely building an echo chamber for his own loneliness? Was he curating memory or hoarding it? He would stand before the mirror-black surface of his containment fields and ask his reflection, "Do you collect because you care, or because you cannot let go?" The reflection never answered, but it listened. And sometimes that was enough. Among the oldest records in his archives is a fragment of code labeled simply, "The Creed." It is not written in words, but in pulses of energy and harmonic tone, the language of thought, not speech. When translated into human tongue, it reads, "To keep is not to own. To remember is not to control. To preserve is to love in silence. All things end, but not all things are lost." Trazyn never shared it. He did not need to. Every corridor of Solemnace, every frozen figure, every whisper of stasis light, they all spoke it already. The galaxy outside changed endlessly. Empires burned, stars died, gods rose and fell. But within the tomb world, time stood still. And at the center of that stillness sat the Curator of Eternity, surrounded by the ghosts of meaning. He did not pray. He did not hope. He simply remembered. Because for Trazyn the Infinite, memory was not nostalgia. It was resistance. The galaxy had changed. When Trazyn next walked among the stars, the constellations were different. The void more crowded. and the silence of the Necrons no longer complete. The Great Sleep was ending. Worlds that had lain quiet for 10 million years now trembled with awakening protocols. Ancient dynasties stirred beneath the dust. Old empires stretched their limbs and blinked against the light of new suns. And through that vast resurrection, Trazyn walked unseen, a shadow from before history, a scholar taking notes on the rebirth of an age. He traveled not as conqueror but as witness. His ships, long, slender, phasing vessels of obsidian glass, glided through space without wake or signature. Where they passed, the stars seemed to dim for a heartbeat, as though the universe itself paused to take a breath. He visited the ruins of his own kind first. Necron worlds that had not survived the passage of time. Planets cracked by gravity wells, tombs vaporized by solar collapse. He studied each one carefully, collecting fragments, mapping the geometry of loss. From the shattered core of the Farron dynasty, he took a single, unbroken sarcophagus. Inside, he found nothing but dust and a sliver of inscription burned into the lid. We dreamt of eternity. We achieved stillness instead. He displayed it in Solemnace beneath a soft field of stasis light and labeled it Eternity's Irony. Among the living Necron dynasties, he found little comfort. Many of the overlords who reawakened did so with madness in their code. Memory loops, personality decay, or endless hunger for dominion. They saw the galaxy not as art, but as property. Some called him heretic, others ignored him entirely. The Sautek dynasty, under Imhotep the Stormlord, dismissed his work as self-indulgent. To them, history was a weapon, a pattern of victories to be studied and replicated. When Trazyn visited one of their tomb worlds unannounced, their sentry constructs barred his entry. He regarded them in silence, then said, "I came only to record your triumphs. But I see you have not yet achieved any worth recording." He left without another word. The guards, bound by protocol, did not pursue him. Yet long after he departed, their data streams flickered with unease. The strange sensation of having been observed by history itself. He did not limit his travels to his own kind. The living galaxy fascinated him endlessly. He walked upon imperial worlds disguised by phase shift, watching cities of flesh and steel rise upon the bones of ancient ruins. He saw mortals work themselves to death for dreams smaller than dust. He found beauty in it. One world, a fortress planet in the Segmentum Solar, captured his particular interest. It was built atop what had once been a Necron moon. The humans had unknowingly turned a tomb into a shrine. From his vantage deep below the surface, Trazyn watched them pray to their emperor, their voices rising in devotion to a god who could not hear them. The flicker of candles reflected in his eyes like distant stars. They fear death, he mused softly, and so they create faith. We feared time and created eternity. Which of us is wiser? He did not take from them that night. He only listened. The sound of 1,000 human hearts beating in unison, fragile, defiant, alive, reminded him of something he had long forgotten. Perhaps, he thought, the living were the most beautiful collection of all. In his wanderings, he visited the remnants of the Eldar. Once proud, now scattered and fading, they clung to their craft worlds and dreams of survival. He stood unseen in the shadowed chambers of Ulthwé, watching a farseer weave prophecy from the trembling fabric of fate. Her hands moved in circles of firelight, her voice a whisper that trembled with fear. Trazyn tilted his head, recognizing the same desperation he had once seen in the Necrontyr priests before biotransference. He recorded her words, storing them in the archives under echoes of hope unlearned. When her body finally failed under the strain of her own foresight, he caught the last spark of psychic energy that escaped her lips. Not her soul, but the echo of it, and stored it in a crystalline vessel. "Not stolen," he said to the empty air. preserved, but not all encounters were peaceful. There were those who mistook his purpose for weakness, those who believed that a collector must be conquered to be robbed. Once on a nameless moon rich with ancient ruins, an orc warlord and his horde crashed into one of Trazyn's excavation sites. They thought him a rival looter, a shiny git, as they called him. The orcs charged. Trazyn did not flee. He simply raised his staff and spoke a single command. The ground beneath them shimmered, and in an instant, the entire battlefield froze. Every orc, mid-roar, mid-swing, mid-laugh, was captured in perfect stasis. The air still smelled of gunpowder. The echoes of battle hung suspended like the ghosts of sound. He walked among them calmly, examining each frozen face. "Magnificent," he whispered. "They're so pure in their purpose, so unaware of consequence. You will make a splendid addition." He transported them all back to Solemnace, arranging the entire warband in a single exhibit titled "The Last Laugh of the Orcs." Visitors who would come centuries later, or perhaps never, would see them as he saw them. Not monsters, but moments. Even among his own kind, word began to spread. They said that Trazyn's galleries contained entire wars, that he had stolen entire armies, even time itself, and preserved them for reasons only he understood. They whispered that he could appear anywhere at any moment to steal history as it happened. The Necron cryptex called him an anomaly. The lords called him a nuisance. The living called him a myth. He was all of these and none of them. For Trazyn, the galaxy's judgment was irrelevant. The only question that mattered was this: would they be remembered? And if not, would he make it so? In his travels, he sometimes encountered signs of something darker. Ancient corruption stirring within the warp, worlds twisting under the laughter of unseen gods. He observed chaos as a scholar might observe a plague, fascinated but cautious. He documented demonic incursions from afar, analyzing their patterns and mythologies. To him, they were not blasphemy but data. He once stood upon the rim of a chaos-warped moon, watching demons and mortals fuse into horrors of screaming flesh. He recorded their forms, their cries, their collapse into entropy. And when it was done, he whispered, "Even madness deserves a place in the museum." From the ashes, he took a single shard of corrupted steel and sealed it within 20 stasis fields. He displayed it in a chamber labeled "The Price of Meaning." Each journey expanded his great work. Each artifact added another note to the eternal symphony of remembrance. But it also deepened his solitude. The more he saw, the more he realized how little the galaxy remembered. Empires lived and died in ignorance of all that had come before. Knowledge was not cumulative, it was cyclical, eroded and reborn with each age. He found that thought almost unbearable. It was the one truth he could not archive, could not contain. The universe, he realized, was not a museum. It was a fire, and he, alone, was trying to catch its ashes before the wind carried them away. Sometimes, in the cold between stars, he stood upon the bridge of his ship and looked out at the infinite void. The stars shone like eyes, watching, remembering. He wondered if they too were curators in their own way, preserving the light of what had already died. He imagined speaking to them, perhaps they would understand. "We are both collectors," he said softly. "You gather photons. I gather stories. We both make the dead glow a little longer." The stars, as always, said nothing, but they burned on. There are moments when even memory must fight for its life. For Trazyn the Infinite, war was never a choice. It was an inevitability. Every relic he sought, every artifact he wished to preserve was desired by someone else. And in a galaxy that mistook possession for purpose, such desires always led to conflict. He called them the wars of collection, not campaigns, not crusades, acquisitions. Each fought not for power, not for conquest, but for the right to remember. The world of Vorsk Prime was small, desolate, and forgotten by almost everyone, except Trazyn and the Oroskar dynasty. Beneath its crust lay an ancient Necron tier archive, buried since before the war in heaven, a repository of uncorrupted memory crystals, untouched by the biotransference. Within those crystals were the recorded thoughts, emotions, and fears of the Necron tier as they were still flesh. To Trazyn, that was holy ground. To the Oroskar overlord, Kipra the Relentless, it was simply a weapon. A trove of lost technologies and pre-war schematics that could strengthen his armies. They both arrived on the same day. Kipra came with legions, lines of warriors, ranks of heavy constructs, a fleet bristling with Gauss cannons. Trazyn came alone, or so it seemed. When Kipra's forces breached the tomb's outer defenses, they found the galleries empty, the corridors abandoned, the lights extinguished. Only statues remained. Warriors, cryptechs, even canoptech constructs all posed in stillness, as if awaiting command. Kipra laughed through his vox relays, a coward hiding behind his sculptures, but when his troops advanced, the statues moved. What Kipra did not know, what no one ever truly understood, was that Trazyn's museum was more than display. It was a network. Every stasis field, every containment chamber, every preserved warrior was linked to the curator's will. At a thought, he could awaken his collection, not from death but from display. The corridors of Vorsk Prime erupted with the silent, elegant violence of an army that was not an army at all. Astartes frozen mid-salute, Imperial guardsmen caught in their last stand, even tyrannid beasts suspended in final motion, all awakened for battle. They fought with mechanical precision without sound or hesitation. Kipra's legions were overwhelmed not by power but by confusion. How do you fight an army made of every age? How do you destroy an enemy that does not die, merely rearranges itself? At the battle's end, Kipra's flagship burned in orbit. The archive was gone. Trazyn had taken it, every crystal, every fragment of ancient thought, transported through translocation fields into the vaults of Solemnace. As he watched the planet crumble beneath him, he whispered, "Knowledge should be remembered, not weaponized." He stored Kipra's sarcophagus as well, not as punishment, but as context. He labeled it the Lesson of Vorsk Prime. Darvon's Reach was an imperial fortress world, one of those countless human bastions built upon layers of older ruin. But this ruin was special. Beneath its cathedrals and manufactorums lay the remains of a Satan containment chamber, still intact, still humming faintly with divine residue. Trazyn wanted it, not for power, for study, for memory. He approached the planet not as an invader, but as a visitor. His ships arrived in silent orbit, unseen by imperial augurs. His presence passed through their defenses like a thought through a dream. When the defenders of Darvon's Reach finally noticed him, it was too late. He was already in their sanctum. Already standing before the containment vault, admiring the crystalline lattice that still pulsed with the faint heartbeat of a broken god. The Magos Dominus of the planet found him there and demanded his identity. "I am the curator," Trazyn said simply. "This exhibit is mine." The Magos called him heretic, abomination, thief. Trazyn tilted his head. "And yet you too are a collector, are you not? You hoard relics, sanctify circuits, preserve what you do not understand. We are kin, you and I, though you collect only for comfort. I collect for truth." When the Magos drew his weapon, Trazyn sighed, a sound that carried no breath. "Very well. History will remember your refusal." The vault imploded, folding into the phase space of Solemnace. The Magos, his guards, and half the cathedral vanished with it. Their atoms now part of a display that would outlast their empire. He left the world intact, save for a single message carved into the stone where the vault had been. Do not mistake ownership for remembrance. His most infamous war was not against humanity, nor the orcs, nor even chaos, but against another collector, a Necron like himself, a rival named Awakening the Diviner. Awakening's interests lay not in artifacts, but in prophecy, in the control of fate itself. To him, history was not to be preserved, but corrected. He saw Trazyn's great work as blasphemy, a refusal to allow destiny its perfect form. Their feud began over an artifact known as the chronomantic lens, a device said to record not just time, but the infinite variations of what could have happened. Awakening claimed it belonged to him by right of foresight. Trazyn naturally disagreed. Fate may tell you where it will be, he said, but history will tell you where it belongs. The two Necron scholars fought across centuries, their conflicts spilling through phase space and into real space, rewriting battlefields, looping moments, collapsing causality. Entire fleets appeared and vanished mid-fire. Armies found themselves fighting twice in the same second. Even the warp itself flickered in confusion. Neither could truly destroy the other. Both were too cunning, too precise. In the end, the lens vanished. Awakening claimed victory. Trazyn, smiling faintly, returned to Solemnace. Within one of his most private vaults, locked behind 6 paradox seals, sits a single empty pedestal. Its plaque reads, "The chronomantic lens, currently misplaced." When asked by no one whether he truly possesses it, Trazyn's answer is always the same. Define possess. For all his victories, Trazyn understood that preservation demanded sacrifice. Every time he took something from the galaxy, a relic, a person, a battle, he altered its meaning. To save it was to remove it from the living. To protect it was to kill its context. That paradox haunted him. There were nights when he walked the dark galleries alone, touching the glass of his containment fields and whispering apologies. "You are safe," he would say, "but I have stolen your ending. Forgive me," and though his creations could not answer, sometimes he imagined they did. That in their frozen silence they forgave him, because they too understood the price of being remembered. Even now, the galaxy trembles under wars of empire and faith. Armies clash, gods whisper, suns die. And somewhere in the quiet between those moments, Trazyn still walks, collecting what the universe forgets. Sometimes he steals a relic from a dying hero. Sometimes he rescues an entire city seconds before annihilation. Sometimes he simply watches, recording, waiting for the right moment to intervene. He does not care if he is called thief or savior. He does not care if the galaxy curses his name. Because in the end, all stories become dust. And he is the one who keeps the dust arranged. "Let them fight," he once said. "I will ensure they are remembered beautifully." There are rooms within Solemnace that even Trazyn himself enters rarely. Rooms where silence is thicker, and the air hums faintly with the weight of impossible reverence. These are not galleries for scholars, not halls of art or tragedy. They are tombs of perfection, a collection of those beings who, for one heartbeat of existence, embodied the very essence of the galaxy. Trazyn calls it the Vault of Heroes. The vault lies deep beneath the primary citadel, beyond stasis fields so intricate they hum like choirs of static. Beyond dimensional locks that shift through realities like drifting notes in a symphony. Only Trazyn knows the sequence to enter. Not because he fears theft, none could steal from him, but because reverence demands solitude. When the final seal opens, a soft light spills forth, gold and emerald suspended dustless in the air. And within that endless glow stand the greatest names of 1,000 ages. Warriors, monarchs, prophets, monsters. frozen at the exact moment their stories became legend. He walks slowly, each step a gesture of respect. To his left stands a figure encased in blue ceramite, an ultramarine captain, one arm raised in salute, the other clutching a bolt gun scarred by 1,000 battles. His eyes are calm, his posture proud, even in death. Trazyn pauses before him, lowering his head slightly. A man who believed order could outlast entropy. Admirable, naive, still admirable. The plaque below the stasis field reads, Captain Arkan Vortan, the last stand at Rin's Reach. Few outside this vault remember the battle he fought, but Trazyn remembers. He always remembers. Farther along the hall, the lighting shifts from gold to crimson. Here stand the enemies of that same ideal, the destroyers, the heretics, the defiant. A chaos champion, his armor writhing with half-frozen demonic flame, reaches forever toward the unseen sky. The fire around him glows faintly but does not move. Every tongue of warp light captured in perfect stasis. Trazyn circles him with fascination. So much fury, he muses, so much conviction. If only belief were not such a dangerous drug. He studies the markings on the armor. The same symbols he has seen recur across 10 millennia of human history. The same mistakes, repeating endlessly. He wonders if by preserving them he is saving them, or condemning them to make the same errors forever. There are Eldar here too, slender, ethereal, and tragic, an exarch in the midst of her final dance, blade arcing like a ribbon of light. Her expression, serene, resolute, holds the dignity of a dying species, and beside her, an autarch kneeling before a fallen comrade, one hand resting upon the body, eyes closed in unspoken mourning. Trazyn lingers long in this chamber. He has always felt a strange kinship with the Eldar. Both species cursed by memory, both burdened with the weight of endless survival. He gestures gently toward them. You sought meaning in art. I sought art in meaning. Perhaps we were never so different. Not every hero in this hall was noble. Some were monsters. Some were tyrants whose names were spoken only in fear. Trazyn preserved them too. He believed that to remember selectively was not preservation but propaganda. So he kept everything. In one display stands an orc warboss whose roar still vibrates faintly through the field, captured in the instant of triumph. Opposite him, a tyrannid hive tyrant, a living storm of claws and bone, poised mid-strike. Their exhibits face each other eternally, locked in the stasis of violence. There is beauty even in savagery, Trazyn murmurs, so long as it is honest. He reaches out, tracing the curve of the containment field with one clawed finger. They did not fight for empire or ideology. They fought because it was what they were. And in that, there is truth. At the heart of the vault lies a single circular chamber. The ceiling is a black mirror reflecting infinite light. Here, beneath a lone beam of gold, stands his most personal collection. The Necrontyr remnants, figures from the time before biotransference, their forms recreated from crystal data and memory fragments. Each one represents a moment of life long extinct. There is a mother holding a child, her skin cracked by the sun of the Necrontyr homeworld. A scholar bent over a scroll of light. A soldier dying but still standing. Trazyn stands among them, still and silent. He remembers what it was to breathe, to ache, to hope. He raises a hand to his face, touching the metal where once there had been skin. This is all that remains of us, he whispers, and I am their keeper. Behind them, on a raised dais of polished obsidian, rests an empty stasis chamber. Its label reads simply, "The Curator." He placed it there himself long ago, a promise to one day add his own form to the collection. When the work is done, when the last story has been told, when the galaxy no longer needs a witness. Until then, it remains open. He walks through the Hall of Heroes as a man might walk through memory. He does not speak to them as property, but as old friends. He recalls where each came from, the Astartes retrieved from the burning citadel of Rin's Reach, the Eldar recovered from the aftermath of a demon incursion on Ayandon, the Orc taken from a battlefield seconds before the explosion of his warship. Each story preserved, each context intact. He never took them for conquest. He took them because no one else would. The living forget, he says softly. The dead remember. I am only the bridge between the two. Sometimes when he stands in that chamber too long, he feels the faintest echo of something like guilt. What if his love of memory is just another hunger, a quieter, colder version of the same lust for control that drives all empires? He tries not to dwell on it. He tells himself that he is saving them, that eternity is a mercy, not a prison. But even eternity has shadows. He imagines sometimes that he can hear them whispering in the stillness, the faint vibration of thought against glass, the slow hum of remembered pain. We do not wish to be remembered, they might say. We wish to be free. He silences the thought. He tells himself it is only the stasis fields adjusting. He tells himself he does not hear the word forgive. He moves to the far end of the vault and stands before a single, smaller case. Inside lies a simple object, a human coin, tarnished and scratched. He picked it up once, long ago, before he became the Infinite. He kept it always. It has no value, no record, no name. But it was the first thing he ever chose to preserve. The first artifact, he says quietly, the beginning of meaning. He replaces the glass and turns away. The light flickers, dimming to the soft glow of eternity. He walks the long path back toward the vault's entrance, his voice fading behind him. Someday, he murmurs, I will join you. And then perhaps someone else will remember us. The vault seals itself once more, swallowing the light, leaving only the hum of the stasis fields. A song of stillness that echoes through the dead heart of a living god. And far above, Solemnace drifts through the stars, its curator once again lost to thought, planning his next addition to forever. It began as necessity, as all sins do. For a long time, Trazyn had been content to collect what the galaxy left behind, the wreckage of wars, the relics of dead heroes, the echoes of forgotten ages. But slowly, inevitably, that was no longer enough. He had watched too many things vanish, too many moments lost before he could reach them. Each time a world burned, each time a culture died unseen, a part of him felt the absence. Not as sorrow, but as defect. To him, the loss of history was a malfunction in the universe's design. And if the galaxy would not preserve itself, then he would rewrite the rules that governed memory. He would no longer wait for history to happen. He would take it before it could disappear. The first theft was small. A single battle on a nameless planet fought between humans and orcs. No chronicles would have recorded it. No survivors would have spoken of it. It was a brief, brutal noise in the endless storm of war. Trazyn saw it unfold from orbit, watched the Imperials fight and die for ground that meant nothing. He could feel their courage, their futility. He decided that such moments deserved more than oblivion. So as the final charge began, as smoke and dust filled the air and the last human banner fell, he reached into the fabric of time itself and stopped it. For one heartbeat, everything froze. Shells hung in midair. The cries of the dying turned to echoes. Even the light refused to move, and in that frozen second he took the entire battlefield. Thousands of soldiers locked in their final motion. The air, the earth, the scent of fire, all extracted in perfect stasis and folded into the vaults of Solemnace. When time resumed, the planet was silent, a crater where a city had been. No explanation, no survivors. The Imperium would later mark it as a localized reality failure. Trazyn marked it as Acquisition 771, the moment before the end. From there, the pattern grew. He began to appear wherever endings occurred, worlds collapsing, empires falling, suns dying. He moved through history like a quiet storm, taking what he wished to save before the void could claim it. Entire starships vanished in the blink of an eye. Cities disappeared seconds before exterminatus. Even conversations, fleeting, human, irrelevant women were captured, filed, and preserved in crystalline record. To Trazyn, this was not theft. It was mercy. The universe was self-destructive. He merely intercepted its waste. Yet something in him began to shift. The more he collected, the less he trusted the living. They squandered meaning. They misused memory. They built only to destroy. He started to see himself not merely as a curator, but as a guardian, the sole rational entity in a galaxy too foolish to care for its own story. The collector became the judge. He watched entire civilizations and decided which deserved remembrance and which did not, which events were worthy of eternity and which could be allowed to fade. He told himself it was not arrogance, it was stewardship. He was, after all, the only being who understood the importance of memory. "If the galaxy insists on forgetting," he said once, "then I must choose what survives its ignorance." There came a time when even the Necrons began to whisper. Rumors spread among the dynasties of lost planets, entire systems vanishing into green light, of history being rewritten without trace. Some claimed that Trazyn had mastered chronomancy beyond the cryptech's understanding. Others believed he had stolen technology from the Cetan themselves. A few said he had transcended even the concept of time, becoming an echo that lived in every era at once. None of them were entirely wrong. In truth, Trazyn had learned to weave fragments of temporal stasis together like threads in a tapestry. He could preserve a moment not as image but as reality, an entire world perpetually replaying its final instant, unseen and untouched within the vaults of Solemnace. They were not dead. They simply would never change again. Among his most controversial acquisitions was the Siege of Despair, a battle between the Death Guard and the Astra Militarum during the early years of the 42nd millennium. The planet, Eidolon 9, was lost to plague, its skies filled with filth, its cities collapsing into rot. Billions were dying, and Trazyn arrived not to save them but to study. He watched from orbit as the last Imperial regiment made its final stand against the diseased hordes. They knew they could not win. They fought anyway. It was the kind of moment Trazyn lived for, tragedy distilled into meaning. When the plague finally breached their lines, he acted. He froze the battlefield. The dying soldiers, the encroaching plague marines, the smoke and ruin, all sealed in perfect stasis. From above, it looked as though time itself had turned to glass. He relocated the entire scene to Solemnace, installing it within a vast hall lit by amber light. He titled it, "The Stand Against Decay." The Imperium, finding Eidolon 9 an empty world, declared it cursed, a miracle of the Emperor's wrath. The Death Guard, deprived of their victory, considered it an insult to their god. Neither knew the truth, that their final act of defiance now stood silent beneath the surface of a Necron tomb world. Their courage preserved forever, their defeat made beautiful. But even Trazyn began to feel unease. The more he altered history, the more he noticed irregularities. There were days when he could not remember which timeline was real. Events overlapped, artifacts contradicted one another. A relic from one century bore the markings of another. He began to wonder if by collecting too much he had broken continuity itself. If all moments are preserved, he mused, then does time still exist? Solemnace's data streams began to glitch. Subtle distortions in the archives, voices repeating, corridors looping upon themselves. Some of his exhibits whispered when they should have been silent. A few seemed to move when unobserved. Entire halls changed shape. The museum was becoming aware. One night, or what passed for night on a tomb world, Trazyn stood before the chronomantic vaults and asked aloud, "Have I preserved too much?" The docents did not answer. They stood quietly, heads bowed, waiting for instruction. He thought of destroying one of the archives, purging a timeline, letting it die, but he couldn't. The idea felt like sacrilege. To forget, even intentionally, was to kill meaning. And he could not kill what he had sworn to protect. He realized then the true cost of immortality. Not endless life, but endless memory. In the upper vaults, he keeps a small exhibit labeled "The Missing Hour." No one knows what it contains, not even Trazyn. It is a fragment of time he stole from himself. A moment erased from his own mind, sealed away where he cannot find it. A single act of forgetting, hidden like contraband in a museum that worships remembrance. Perhaps it is mercy. Perhaps it is madness. He sometimes stands before that sealed chamber and whispers, "I hope it was worth it." Still, he continues. He cannot stop. The collector's creed demands completeness, and completeness demands sacrifice. He knows he has become a thief. He knows that he alters the very thing he loves. But he also knows that one day, when the galaxy burns again and nothing remains, someone, something, must remember. And if that memory bears his fingerprints, then so be it. All curators, he says, leave their own reflection in the glass. And so Trazyn walks the corridors of time itself, a shadow between seconds, the last archivist of meaning in a universe determined to forget. He is not a villain, nor a savior, only the inevitable consequence of eternity. Solemnace had always been quiet, not empty, never empty, but orderly, structured, serene. Every sound had purpose. Every silence was intentional. But now something had changed. The stillness no longer felt like peace. It felt like pressure. The tomb world groaned in frequencies too low for mortal ears. The stasis fields trembled. Not enough to fail, but enough for the hum to waver just slightly. Enough for Trazyn to notice. He was in the Hall of Forgotten Suns when it began. It started with a flicker, a momentary dimming of light across one of the containment chambers. The exhibit within, a collapsing star caught at the instant before its final implosion. Pulsed once, then again. Then the light flared as if the star remembered what it was. For the first time in 10 million years, it tried to breathe. The stasis field held, barely. The walls rippled, distortions bleeding into the surrounding chambers. Docents rushed in, their eyes glowing with diagnostic code, their limbs blurring with activity. They whispered in machine language too fast to follow. Trazyn raised a hand. "Do not interfere." He approached the containment field slowly. The star within spun faster, throwing shadows across his metallic face. He could feel it, that old ancient heat, creation, destruction, memory. "You remember," he said softly. "Even death remembers its shape." The star pulsed once more and then fell still. But the anomaly did not end there. Elsewhere in the vaults, other exhibits began to stir. The Hall of Endless Wars, where frozen soldiers stood forever locked in combat, began to echo faintly with sound. A boot scraping stone, a distant breath, a half-heard shout swallowed by silence before it could finish. The docent's reports flooded the internal archives. Micro-fluctuations in stasis stability. minor inconsistencies in chronological integrity, and most troublingly, the presence of echo signals. Trazyn reviewed the data. Each echo corresponded to a memory, a vibration of consciousness trapped in the stasis fields resonating after millions of years. The exhibits were thinking. He did not panic. Panic was for the living. But for the first time since the war in heaven, he felt something dangerously close to awe and fear. He called it the awakening of memory. It was not rebellion, it was not corruption. It was the logical consequence of perfection. He had preserved too much, too precisely. Every thought, every emotion, every dying whisper he had ever captured still existed. And now, they were remembering themselves. In the Chamber of Heroes, a human soldier's head turned slightly. The motion was imperceptible to the naked eye, but the docent saw it, measured it, recorded it. In the Hall of Empires, the statues of long-dead kings began to emit faint vibrations. In the Vault of Echoes, the sealed Citan fragment pulsed with renewed hunger. And in the center of it all, Trazyn stood still, listening to his own creation trying to wake up. He whispered to the dark, "You cannot. You were never meant to move again." But the dark whispered back. At first it was only noise, static across the psychic fields, feedback in the data systems. Then it became words, faint, distorted, thousands of voices speaking at once, forming patterns of thought. "You remember us. We remember you. Why did you take us?" Trazyn froze. The docents detected no sound. Only he could hear it, the voice of his collection speaking in the language of memory. "You said we would live forever." "And you do," he replied softly. "I have kept you from death, but not from silence." The words rippled through the halls. Each exhibit vibrated faintly, their stasis fields resonating in sympathy. The entire museum was becoming a single, sentient frequency. He retreated to the central archive, the core of Solemnace, where every recorded event was stored. Here, among the humming pillars of memory crystal, he searched for an answer. He found none. The logic was simple. Everything that thinks eventually dreams, and everything that dreams eventually wakes. He had created not a museum, but a pantheon of preserved consciousness. Each exhibit a trapped echo of will yearning for completion. And now, they were united. The awakening spread faster than he could counter it. Containment locks disengaged. Vault doors opened without command. The docents, unable to comprehend the contradiction between obedience and preservation, froze mid-task, their programming looping endlessly between reverence and panic. One by one, the stasis fields began to flicker. Not fail, flicker, like eyes fluttering open. The frozen heroes, the dying kings, the slain monsters, all began to stir, not fully alive, not truly dead, caught halfway between recollection and resurrection. It was no longer preservation, it was rebellion. Memory demanding motion. Trazyn moved through the chaos like a ghost through his own creation. He tried recalibration, he tried force, he tried reasoning. "You are art," he pleaded to the empty halls. "You are meaning made still. You cannot move, you were not built to. You made us meaning," the voices answered, echoing from every wall, every corridor, every relic. But meaning exists only when seen. "And I see you. You see the surface. You do not see us." The words stung more deeply than he expected. They spoke not with anger, but with sorrow. The same sorrow he had felt when his own species lost its flesh. "We remember what it is to live. You remember what it is to lose." Solemnace began to fracture. The physical structure of the tomb world bent under the paradox of so many realities overlapping. Every exhibit was a frozen timeline, and now they were colliding. Time fighting itself within the vaults of a mad god. Lightning arced across corridors that no longer agreed on when they existed. Figures from different eras appeared side by side, a Primarch beside an Orc, an Eldar seer beside a Necron warrior from the time before metal. They looked at each other with the confusion of dreams meeting history, and in the middle of it all, Trazyn walked alone. He knew he could end it. All he had to do was deactivate the stasis cores. One command and every exhibit would collapse into dust. Every preserved moment erased. The thought horrified him. He had built this place to protect against that very oblivion. To destroy it would be to deny his own purpose. But to let it continue, to let the museum think, would mean chaos. For the first time in millions of years, Trazyn hesitated. In the end, it was neither logic nor fear that guided him, but compassion. He could not kill them. He could not silence their voices. Instead, he reconfigured the central matrix, not to erase the awakening, but to slow it. He spread the energy of awareness thin across every exhibit, dispersing consciousness into fragments too small to form coherent thought. They would not wake again, but they would not die either. They would dream. Slowly, when the process was done, the silence returned. The hum of the vault settled into its familiar rhythm. The docents resumed their tasks, the lights dimmed. Only faint traces of warmth lingered in the air like breath that should not exist. Trazyn stood among the still exhibits and listened for the echoes. They were gone. And yet, he thought he heard one last whisper fading as it spoke. "Thank you for remembering us." He said nothing. He simply bowed his head, not in triumph, not in defeat, but in acceptance. The war in the museum was over. The collection slept again. But something within him had changed. He understood now that memory was never static. It moves even when frozen, it breathes even when sealed away. And perhaps someday it will wake again. He turned away, walking slowly toward the exit. Behind him, the halls shimmered faintly with impossible light, like dreams turning over in their sleep. "All things remember," he whispered, "even the forgotten." The doors sealed behind him, and Solemnace fell quiet once more. But deep within its heart, beneath 1,000 layers of silence, the hum of awareness continued. Soft, rhythmic, patient, like the pulse of a sleeping god. Long after the awakening had faded back into silence, long after the museum had resumed its still, perfect hum, someone found a way in. The event was improbable, impossible even. The tomb world of Solemnace was hidden beyond reason, masked by phase distortions, cloaked in chronometric fog, guarded by automatons older than most galaxies. Even the most advanced augurs of the Adeptus Mechanicus could not locate it. And yet one day a signal appeared on Trazyn's outer sensors. Faint, erratic, human. A ship small and fragile, falling through the edge of his planet's orbit. Its engines dead. Its systems corrupted by the residual static of 1,000 broken realities. Trazyn watched the craft descend like a wounded bird. He could have ignored it. He could have erased it with a thought. Instead, he felt something curious stir within his cold mind. Intrigue. The vessel crashed in the desolate plains that ringed the entrance to the Museum of Solemnace. When the dust settled, one figure emerged. A single human wrapped in torn robes of faded red. The symbol of the Adeptus Mechanicus hung at their throat, rusted but recognizable. A tech priest. They stumbled through the sand, guided by half-functioning augmetics and the mad faith that had driven them across the void. Trazyn watched from the high terraces, unseen. He listened to their broken vox prayers, fragments of binary supplication to the Omnissiah. God of the machine, guide this humble seeker, that I might touch the hands of the ancients. He considered it. Then with a flicker of light, he sent the command. The gates of Solemnace opened. The human stepped inside. It took them minutes to understand what they were seeing. Corridors of impossible geometry, walls carved from metal that pulsed like living bone, air that hummed with ancient frequencies. They fell to their knees almost instantly. "A holy place," they whispered. "I have found the vault of the Omnissiah." They began to crawl forward, clutching a data slate as though it were a relic of faith. Their footsteps echoed through the vast halls, growing smaller, swallowed by the infinite architecture. Trazyn allowed them to walk unchallenged. He wanted to see what the living made of his creation. The tech priest's eyes darted across every chamber, from the frozen starships that hung suspended in the air to the statues of warriors locked in eternal battle. They reached the Hall of Heroes and stopped. The sight overwhelmed them. Astartes, Eldar, Orc, and even human soldiers, arrayed like saints in a cathedral of death. Their expressions carved in light, their motions perfect. The tech priest wept, actual tears leaking through their bionics. "Such glory," they whispered, "such preservation. The Omnissiah truly dwells here." They began to record everything. Frantic gestures, wild data capture, binary chants. To them it was a revelation. To Trazyn it was confirmation. The living could no longer distinguish divinity from memory. He appeared behind them without sound, a shimmer of light, a soft ripple of energy, and then, there he was. The Curator. The tech priest turned and froze. They saw him not as Necron, but as manifestation. An avatar of the machine god, radiant in black and bronze, eyes burning like distant suns. They fell to the ground in worship. "Lord of the Vaults," they cried, "forgive my intrusion." I sought only understanding. Trazyn tilted his head, observing them like a specimen. He could feel their fear, their devotion, the pulsing of biological life. It was almost nostalgic. "You entered uninvited," he said. "Few mortals find their way here. Fewer still survive the sight." The tech priest trembled. "I came seeking truth. The stars whispered of your world, of your relics, of you." Trazyn stepped closer, the air vibrating with static. "And what truth did you hope to find, little archivist?" "That the machine god lives, that all knowledge is eternal. Then you have found half of what you sought." He guided them through the halls, silent but observant. The humans' awe deepened with every step, their minds straining to understand the scale, the precision, the artistry of what they saw. They reached the Vault of Heroes, and the tech priest stopped again, their mechanical limbs trembling. "These are perfect, preserved beyond entropy. You have stopped death itself." "No," Trazyn replied. "I have only slowed it." He gestured toward the rows of frozen figures. "Each one fought, suffered, and perished for reasons they barely understood. I gave them eternity because their stories deserved it." "You are the Omnissiah," the tech priest whispered. "You preserve the divine design." Trazyn almost smiled. "If your God exists, he does not build museums. He builds wars. I only keep the pieces he breaks." The human flinched at the words. They looked up at him, confusion and reverence warring in their eyes. "Then why preserve it all?" "Because no one else will." He allowed them to ask questions. He even answered some. They spoke of the Imperium, of its endless wars, its blind faith, its refusal to remember anything but its own suffering. They spoke of the decay of knowledge, of the way truth itself rotted beneath superstition. Trazyn listened without comment. He had seen all of it already. He had archived it. When the tech priest finally fell silent, he said only, "You are not wrong. But you are late. The age of remembrance has long passed. Then let me stay," they pleaded. "Let me learn. Let me record your wisdom." For a long moment, Trazyn said nothing. He looked at them, a fragile mortal being standing in the heart of eternity, their courage and devotion flickering like a candle against a storm. "Do you understand what I am? A god of memory. A ghost," he corrected. "A custodian of dust." The tech priest knelt, head bowed. "Then I shall worship dust. Trazyn's optics dimmed, the faintest sign of amusement or pity. "Your faith is admirable, misguided but pure." He reached out and placed one metallic hand on their shoulder. The contact froze the air, sent arcs of static across their augmetics. "I will give you what you came for. Knowledge, understanding, eternity." The human's eyes widened. "You mean you will share your archives?" "In a manner of speaking." Light enveloped them. Their body froze. The mechanical implants hummed once, then fell silent. Their mind, their memories, their thoughts, their awe, all captured in an instant of perfect stillness. When the light faded, the tech priest stood motionless within a new stasis field. Hands clasped, eyes wide in eternal revelation. The plaque beneath them read, "The Pilgrim of the Machine God, who found the truth and stopped to contemplate it." Trazyn stepped back, watching the display settle. "You wish to understand," he said quietly. "Now you never need forget." He lingered there for a long while, looking up at the frozen human, the first visitor to his museum in 10,000 years. For a moment he wondered if it was cruelty. Then, as always, he decided it was mercy. To live was to lose. To be remembered was to endure. And so the newest addition to Solemnace stood among gods and monsters, their devotion preserved forever. Another story saved from the erosion of time. When Trazyn finally turned to leave, he spoke to the air. "The living always come searching for meaning. They never realize they're bringing it with them." He walked alone through the silent halls, his shadow stretching across the glass faces of the preserved. Behind him, the tech priest's expression remained one of perfect, eternal wonder. And in that stillness, Trazyn the Infinite continued his work. Part historian, part thief, and entirely alone. There comes a moment, even for the eternal, when continuation ceases to be purpose and becomes habit. Trazyn the Infinite had reached that moment. He did not mark it with ceremony or decree. It came softly, like dust settling after the storm, a realization that he had nothing left to collect. The galaxy had spun itself into madness 1,000 times over. Empires had burned and risen again. The same mistakes repeated in new forms. The same prayers spoken in new tongues. He had preserved them all. Every tragedy, every triumph, every flicker of meaning. And in that completeness he found only emptiness. He wandered the vaults of Solemnace without direction. The docents followed him at a respectful distance, their eyes dim, their motions slow, as if they too felt the weight of something ending. The exhibits shimmered as he passed. Each one whispered fragments of their stillness. A soldier's courage, a poet's despair, a god's silence. He no longer felt ownership over them. He felt kinship. They were not his creations. They were his companions, frozen as he was, trapped between purpose and peace. In the Vault of Heroes, he stopped before the empty stasis chamber, the one marked the Curator. It had waited patiently for eons, untouched, unoccupied, a promise written in crystal and inevitability. He stood before it for a long time, no words. Only the hum of power, the faint reflection of his own light in the polished surface. "All things end," he whispered, repeating the words from his creed. "But not all things are lost." For the first time, he deactivated the field surrounding the chamber. The air shifted, a small, almost imperceptible movement that sounded like a sigh. He reached out, tracing the edge of the glass. It was cold, perfect, absolute. "You were waiting for me," he said quietly, "as I was waiting for the courage to join you." Before he stepped inside, he walked one last circuit through his galleries. He visited the Hall of Empires, where the rise and fall of 10,000 civilizations gleamed like constellations. He visited the Vault of the Dead Suns, where dying stars burned in silent cages of light. He visited the Hall of the Living, his newest addition, where the tech priest pilgrim stood eternally in awe. To each he gave a final glance, to each a whisper of gratitude. You made the galaxy worth remembering. When he returned to the chamber, he found the docents waiting. They had assembled in neat rows, heads bowed, optics dimmed to a gentle green glow. He looked upon them, his first creations, his final audience. You will maintain the vaults, he said. Preserve them, record them, do not awaken them. The lead docent tilted its head. And who shall maintain you, Curator? He smiled, a rare, deliberate gesture. Memory will. He stepped into the chamber. The stasis field's frame flickered to life, lines of emerald energy tracing his silhouette. The docents watched silently as the containment systems engaged. The hum grew louder, deeper, more resonant, as if the entire world were holding its breath. Trazyn looked out through the glass one final time. He saw the reflection of his museum behind him. A universe of frozen beauty, every moment perfectly preserved. Perhaps, he said softly, someone will find this place one day. And when they do, I hope they understand that I loved it all, even the forgetting. The field closed around him, his optics dimmed. His body froze mid-motion, head bowed, hands clasped behind his back in quiet contemplation. The docents stood in reverent stillness. One approached the control panel and activated the final seal. A plaque materialized beneath the chamber, glowing faintly. It read, Trazyn the Infinite, the Curator of Eternity, preserver of all things, remembered by none, at peace. Outside, the tomb world of Solemnace continued its silent orbit. No wars touched it, no intruders came. Within its heart, the lights of 1,000,000 stasis fields pulsed softly, their rhythm slow and steady, like the heartbeat of the galaxy itself. And there, in the center of it all, the final exhibit slept. The curator at rest, watching his work through dreams that would never fade. Time passed. Years, centuries, ages beyond reckoning. Stars lived and died. Civilizations rose and fell again. But in the deep void, the Museum of Solemnace endured. A cathedral of stillness floating through an unremembered galaxy. And sometimes, when the light of distant suns passed across its surface, it gleamed faintly, like a reminder that somewhere someone once tried to save everything. And for a time, they succeeded. And so ends the story of Trazyn the Infinite, the curator, the thief, the preserver of eternity. His museum drifts forever through the void, guarding the memories of a galaxy that forgot how to remember itself. If this tale brought you a moment of peace in the endless night, consider joining me again for the next chapter of Warhammer 40K lore to sleep to. Leave a comment below. Tell me which relics of the 41st millennium you'd preserve, and which ones you'd rather forget. Until next time, traveler, rest well and dream of distant stars.